Hello, I'm here with retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Bob Hesselbein. Bob served in Vietnam and has been leading an effort to recognize the very significant sacrifices of helicopter pilots and their crews in the Vietnam War. I am so delighted to get the opportunity to join in those efforts, sponsoring legislation here in Washington, D.C. Bob, I wonder if you could start by telling me a little bit more about your service in Vietnam.
Well, before I tell you about my service in Vietnam, I want to thank you for taking the leading edge in the Senate, for boldly stepping forward in a very bipartisan manner to help the Vietnam Helicopter Crew Monument Act take legs and start to move forward, because it's been 50 years and it's taken a long time, and it's an honor to have you spearheading the effort in the Senate along with Senator Sullivan to make this a reality. In my own case, I was what they called a high school to flight school kid. Right out of high school, 18 years old, I went into the Army for the purpose of becoming a helicopter pilot. And I was one of the youngest children, and I didn't feel like a child then, but looking back on 18-year-olds, quite the kid to me now. Went there, and the challenge of going through the training was difficult. When you left, though, when you completed that training and you went on to your follow-on helicopter, which in my case was a Cobra gunship, you felt ready to go, you felt prepared. And then when we went into combat, you learned very, very quickly how serious it was, how important your mission was to the infantry on the ground. And flying a helicopter gunship allowed me to do many missions in support of others, to look for the enemy with scout helicopters, to go out in the middle of the night to a base being attacked and provide cover for them with rockets and machine guns, and then escorting medevacs who would have to hover at night and sometimes hover down into a hole into the jungle to evacuate wounded Americans, wounded Vietnamese, and sometimes wounded enemy to try to save their lives. And I saw incredible valor from people who one would never expect to see, the courage that we saw and the sacrifice and the selflessness of these individuals. And I saw many die, saw many of my friends die. And when we came back, we didn't come back to in my case, it was just sort of a calm when I came home, but we didn't bond as much as perhaps the fellows did in World War II or maybe even Korean War. And so it took many years for us to gather together. And one of the things we began to realize is Vietnam is known as a helicopter war.
Right.
But yet, there is no helicopter memorial that honors all the pilots and the crew members from the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about this effort, because you've been working so hard to make this monument, this memorial, a reality. So can you tell me and everyone watching why this is so important to you at this period of time?
Well, we're getting old. It's hard to tell, hard to believe, but it's true, we're getting old. And it's, in my case, the war ended 45 years ago. For many, it's the 50th commemoration. And we discovered that there was no national memorial for the helicopter pilots and crew members, but yet, other than special forces, they had the highest rate of casualties. They literally, almost 10% of those killed in Vietnam were helicopter pilots and crew members. And if you add the Americans who were passengers, it almost achieved 6,000, over 10%. 1 out of 10 Americans died in a helicopter in the Vietnam War, but yet there's no memorial to honor them. The iconic symbol of that war has been ignored, and you see it in the movies, you see it in all the books. You can't read a story about Vietnam without the description of a helicopter and what they did for whatever purpose, and yet there's no memorial.
So tell us what this memorial is going to look like, and why do you think it's so important to have it at Arlington National Cemetery?
We went to Arlington National Cemetery in the spring of 2014, and we wanted to talk to them about donating a tree, because the trees are dying on occasion and they're always looking for something to donate, and we were having a reunion there. And a historian came to us and said, do you realize how many helicopter pilots and crew members are buried here in Arlington who died during the war, and the MIAs who came back? And do you realize there's a cluster of Medal of Honor recipients who are helicopter pilots who are buried here? And we had no idea. And we began to research it. And this historian, who no longer works for Arlington, by the way, he got us involved in this research. And the discovery that Arlington National Cemetery possessed casualties from every branch of service, the fact that the missing in action crews that are still coming back 4 decades later are all buried in Arlington. Their markers are there in Arlington. And we said, where do we want to put this? We don't want to make a large one. There are places where we could try to put in, but it's inappropriate to this. Arlington is the appropriate place because that's where America goes to honor their dead.
Yes, indeed. Can you share any of the stories of some of the brave people that you served with in Vietnam?
I can tell you about Wisconsinites that died. Glenn Nowakowski is buried in Milwaukee. Glenn was a classmate of mine. We went to Cobra School together. And Glenn went to one unit and I went to another. And they're not quite sure why Glenn's aircraft went down. He came off of a tack, pulled off, and the aircraft literally rolled on its back, started to spiral down. They never made a radio call, and the aircraft was completely destroyed upon impact, so they were never able to determine. Plus, it was in the enemy territory, so they never really figured out why. But Glenn's there. Another person, David Kink, 19 years old from Middleton, Wisconsin, goes to Vietnam, and a month and a half later, he's killed. And it affected the whole Kink family of Middleton. David is buried in Madison, and I never met David Kink, but I felt a relationship to him because we were the same age. And my daughter and I clean his grave every veteran holiday, such as Memorial Day and Veterans Day. But I've had many classmates who, they died in strange ways. There was no predicting who lived and who died. A fellow named Carlos Pedrosa, good pilot, but one day I took Carlos's picture, and the very next day, he's at the same airfield called Kontum, and he's killed by a rocket in the background of the picture that he was taken. Pilots who had premonition of their death. Robert Stern asked me to fly one day. He said, "You're not flying tomorrow, why don't you take my place?" And I said, "What kind of mission?" He goes, "It's a boring escort mission." And I said, "I don't want to do a boring flight." Well, they were diverted, and they were shot down and killed on their first pass.
Wow.
Robert had a child he never saw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing. That's why we need the memorial now.
That's why we need the memorial.
You've encountered some roadblocks in moving this forward. Can you explain for our listeners?
Arlington National Cemetery suffers from the challenge of it's filling up. They're trying to gain more land around Arlington National Cemetery, but they have a blind focus of preserving space for graves. And the leadership of Arlington National Cemetery is dedicated to carrying out their mission of honorably burying Americans in the cemetery who have earned the right to be buried there. But in their zest to ensure grave space, they've lost the sight that Arlington National Cemetery is a military shrine of our country. I always say to people, if New York City is the financial heart of the nation, and Washington, D.C. is the heart of government, then Arlington National Cemetery is the heart of our military. Yeah. And we need these memorials, and Arlington has forgotten that. And I heard individuals say, if we allow you to have this helicopter memorial, 20 years from now, the veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan may want a memorial in there too. And we said, you're absolutely right, and they should have one to honor their dead that are buried there.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for sharing your story, for sharing the stories of brave service members with whom you served. I want to thank you for your service and just let you know how proud I am to work alongside you to make this a reality.
I thank you. It was truly my honor to serve, and I think I speak for many veterans who say it was our honor to serve our country. And we want to thank you once again because you have led the fight in the Senate to convince your peers and the legislators that are coming to Washington to support this important memorial. Thank you.
Well, thank you.